Right after Hurricane Helene, it looks like Florida is going to be hit once again with Hurricane Milton. Now, that being said, you'll be surprised to know that there are still a lot of people that believe that the governments, the powers that be, do not manipulate the weather, that there is no such thing as weather modification, that they can't manipulate the weather. Shocking but true, but again, a majority of people believe that the government cannot do this. But for those that know that they have been manipulating and modifying the weather ever since the 1940s, if not before then. And we know this due to operations like Project Cirrus and Project Storm Fury. With Project Cirrus, they were seeding hurricanes like Hurricane Esther with silver iodide, and then they moved on to much better tactics with Project Storm Fury. Now, if you were going to talk to somebody about weather manipulation, weather modification, and you were to bring up Project Storm Fury, Project Cirrus, it would pretty much be lost on deaf ears, because this goes all the way back, like I said, to the 1940s, to the 1960s. And they could come back and say, well, maybe they put an end to it. So what we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at a couple of videos that you may use as proof to show that weather manipulation, weather modification actually exist. And one of the first videos we're going to go ahead and look at is this video here from CBS, where they are interviewing scientist Michio Kaku, and he says some rather interesting things. You also have to remember that this video was also 11 years ago, and I am sure they have come a long way from what they're telling us here.
They were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now,
I always found this part of the interview rather funny, due to how fast he jumps up to say allegedly, and to make sure he says allegedly, even though he talks about other countries using weather manipulation. As soon as he talks about the United States using it during the Vietnam War, then she starts to jump up and gets nervous. That part is rather telling.
We realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops, and if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine?
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all, because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting, Professor Michio Kaku. Thank you so much.
So they went from silver iodide and the tactics they used back in the 50s and 60s to now lasers. But what they are telling us here, even 11 years ago, is still old. The technology they have that we don't see is well advanced. This next video is definitely creepy, and it comes from NASA, and they are showing you they can create rain clouds. And if they can create rain clouds like this, they can definitely manufacture hurricanes. And this is technology they are showing us from 6 years ago. But you also have to understand what they are showing us is still old to them. Imagine the technology that we do not see. And after watching this, if you still say to yourself that weather manipulation, weather modification, hurricanes cannot be created, then I really don't know what to tell you.
Don't worry if you can't hear what I'm saying. I couldn't even hear myself. This is the loudest sound you could possibly conceive. And, as it turns out, the cleanest. Now, the most amazing thing is that that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you. It's raining. That's unbelievable. Oh. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
Some can even say that weather manipulation even played a role during 9/11. Many people do not know, but that day in the morning, there was scheduled to be a hurricane, Hurricane Erin. And I have spoken about this once before. September 10th, news agencies were telling us to brace for Hurricane Erin because it will make landfall the next day. It will hit. They were calculating the damages, they were calculating the totals. They were even saying how many people would lose their lives. Hurricane Erin would be absolutely devastating. The very next day, Hurricane Erin was actually touching New York. Then out of nowhere, magically, this cold front comes along and moves Hurricane Erin to a different direction and moves it out to sea to give 9/11, to give New York beautiful clear skies.
The day before 9/11, over the greater New York area, skies were turbulent with extensive cloud cover, accompanied by scattered showers. I remember that day very well. I was here at News 12 doing my evening weathercast and showing our viewers satellite images of a very powerful storm, a Category 3 hurricane, Hurricane Erin, which was moving on a track that would take it perhaps the next day, right into the tri-state metropolitan area. Notice also the movement. It's moving toward the northwest, and if it were to keep on moving, it would be heading right toward Long Island and southern New England, but it's not going to do that. But then I pointed out that the cold front that was moving through our area would ultimately push Erin away from the east coast. Will be turned around and moved to the north and northeast, out of the picture for us as this cold front comes on in and through, and for all intents and purposes, just boom, kicks Erin right on out to sea. I was actually happy to tell our viewers that we were going to dodge a major weather bullet, that the hurricane was going to veer away from the eastern seaboard, that September 11th was going to be a beautiful day, blue skies and bright sunshine. In retrospect, maybe it would have been better if we had to deal with the hurricane. The front moves through, less humid air moves in, and sunshine. You know, if that cold front had been just 24 to 36 hours slower than it was, the weather on 9/11 might have been much different than it turned out to be.
Well, there's no doubt if a hurricane had hit on 9/11, the situation would have been changed.
Bill Corbell is a broadcast meteorologist who began his career as a weather officer in the Air Force and recently retired as a lieutenant colonel. The highlight of his military career was a 2-year stint as a weather forecaster for Air Force One. Corbell, who is a private pilot, believes that if Hurricane Erin had moved into the Northeast on September 11th, it likely would have canceled numerous flights and prevented the terrorists from carrying out their plans.
The hijackers, the terrorists needed certain conditions to fulfill what they wanted to do, and the weather just would not have allowed that if a hurricane had hit New York on that day.
Ironically, the beautifully pristine weather that arrived on the morning of September 11th actually helped the terrorists.
I mean, they needed really good weather, which they got. That cold front just scoured the atmosphere clean. It was as clear as you recall and as blue as we have ever seen around here. So that allowed these modestly competent pilot terrorists to see the targets and do what they had to do.
If it had not been September 11th, it might have been some other date then that the terrorists would have chosen. But one thing that we are certain of, if Hurricane Erin had continued on its northwesterly course into the northeastern states and the tri-state metropolitan area, the tragic events that have been burned into our collective memories and associated with the date September 11th might never have happened. It would have been the storm that possibly could have changed history. Joe Rayo, News 12.
Very, very interesting how that works. Just out of nowhere, this cold front just happened to move the hurricane out of the way to give perfectly blue, clear skies. But in any case, thank you so much for watching it. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, please like, as any engagement does help the channel grow. Once again, thank you so much for your support.